Okay, so that first sentence from Ra really
Mhm.
jumps out at you, right? It's like, whoa, hold on. These images are anything but a resource for the development of faith and will. I mean,
Oh.
that's a powerful statement to start with, especially when we're about to dive into Ra's perspective on archetypes
Yeah.
from the Law of One. And it's like right away they're saying these potent symbols, these archetypes,
Mm.
they're not just like a simple answer sheet or like a rule book for life.
Right. It really flips the script on how we usually approach these concepts. Like you said, often archetypes are presented as fixed, having these very specific meanings. Like you can just look them up in a dictionary and
Yeah,
there you go. You got to figure it out. But Ra is telling us from the start, it's not that straightforward at all.
not at all. It's much more dynamic,
Oh,
much more personal.
right.
So that's really what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive today.
Oh.
We're going to look at these archetypes not as maps with like a clear set of directions,
Right.
but as what I find so fascinating, cosmic mirrors.
I love that term.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack that term. Why does Ra use that imagery? What's the real purpose of these archetypes when we see them as reflections instead of, rigid guides?
Right.
And how does that actually empower us in our own lives?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the reasons why people are drawn to this kind of exploration, the desire to learn to understand themselves, this approach just makes so much sense. You're not being handed a set of interpretations.
Right.
It's an invitation to connect with these profound ideas in a way that truly resonates with your own journey, your own unique experiences.
Exactly. And to be clear, for anyone listening, these insights we're talking about, they come directly from Ra's teachings.
Yeah.
This isn't just like our take on archetypes or pulling from, standard psychology or history or
Yeah.
this is a specific ancient stream of wisdom. That's what the Law of One material is.
Yeah.
And it gives a very different perspective on these concepts.
Yeah. And that begs the question right off the bat, if these archetypes aren't maps, then what are they?
What are they?
Yeah.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
So Ra describes each archetype as a significant ding and sitch. That's a mouthful.
It is, right? But essentially, in simpler terms, it means a thing in itself. So something that has its own inherent nature, its own reality. But it doesn't stop there.
Right.
Each archetype also has its own complex of concepts.
So it's not just a simple definition.
No, it's not just like one word, one meaning. It's like a whole web of interconnected ideas. So instead of trying to pin it down with one simple definition, think of it more like
Like a network.
yeah, like a network, or Laura actually uses this really helpful analogy of a molecule.
Okay.
So individual concepts are like atoms, right? And when they come together in this very specific way, they form a molecule, which in this case would be the archetype. And just like water has properties that hydrogen and oxygen don't have on their own right, you can't just look at the individual elements. You need to see how they interact, how they create something new.
So trying to pin down an archetype with like a one-sentence definition? It's like trying to understand water just by looking at hydrogen or just looking at oxygen. Exactly.
Yeah.
You miss the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You miss that dynamic interaction.
Yeah.
And I think for the listener, for someone who's really looking for a deep understanding, who doesn't want to just skim the surface,
Yeah.
this framework is so crucial because it gives you depth without oversimplifying.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a really crucial point that Ra emphasizes. It's the danger of interpreting these archetypes too literally.
Ooh, too literally.
Yeah, and Ra gives a really direct warning about this. Let no consideration of bird or beast darkness or light shape or shadow keep any which seeks from the central consideration of unity.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like Ra is saying, don't get so caught up in the surface details.
Right.
Right? The specific symbols, the myths, the literal images that you miss the forest for the trees.
Right.
You miss that core message, that underlying unity that all these things are pointing towards.
It's so easy to get lost in the weeds, like trying to decode every feather on a bird or the precise meaning of a shadow. But that's not really the point. It's not about becoming a walking encyclopedia of symbols. It's about moving towards this deeper understanding of interconnectedness.
Right. And for you, the listener, I think about this all the time. If you're interested in gaining knowledge effectively and efficiently, this is huge because it means you can focus on the essence, the feeling, the resonance of the archetype, rather than getting bogged down in endless interpretations.
Totally. And that's where I think this concept of gestalt comes in.
Gestalt, yes.
Ra talks about myth and symbol as tools, but tools of the deep mind, right? So
Yeah.
they're not there to give you like a logical step-by-step explanation.
Yeah.
They're meant to evoke something within you, a deeper, more intuitive resonance.
But a feeling.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's a quote that really gets at this. It is informative to survey the relationships, but this is secondary to the discovery of the purest gestalt or vision or melody melody which each archetype signifies.
Ooh, I love that melody.
Right, it's like studying the individual notes on a musical score versus actually hearing the music itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the relationships between symbols can be interesting, but the real value is in grasping that overall feeling, that fundamental essence, that melody of the archetype.
So we're not just talking about, dry intellectual analysis here.
Mhm.
We're talking about something that speaks to our intuition, our emotions,
Yeah.
our whole being.
And that's where that image of stained glass windows comes in, right?
Yeah.
So perfect. Each archetype, like a differently colored pane, presents a unique facet of that central light, that light of the one,
Yeah.
inviting you to contemplate its beauty and its meaning within your own experience.
Beautiful. So these cosmic mirrors, they're not about giving us all the answers prepackaged.
Right.
In fact, Rye even says the archetypical mind does not resolve any paradoxes or bring all into unity, which, might sound a bit surprising at first.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive. But if we think about the nature of third density existence, which is, our current level of reality, paradox is kind of baked in, things aren't always black and white. There are these ambiguities, these tensions, these seemingly contradictory truths.
So instead of trying to force these archetypes into neat little boxes that resolve every contradiction, we're being asked to embrace that paradox as part of the journey.
As part of the experience.
Yeah. And for you, the listener who enjoys exploring multiple perspectives, who, isn't afraid of a little bit of ambiguity,
Yeah.
this is going to resonate
Okay.
because it's about holding those different viewpoints, those tensions, without needing one definitive answer.
Some mysteries are meant to be contemplated, not necessarily solved.
Right. Exactly. Now let's talk about where this whole framework of archetypes comes from, according to Ra.
Yeah.
Because Ra tells us this concept originated on Venus
On Venus.
as a training aid in developing the magical personality.
Wow, so a very specific origin.
Very specific. It wasn't just some random development. This was the product of many, many generations of work on what those on Venus understood as the archetypical mind. And that key point is that it was used as a training aid, right? It wasn't about predicting the future or understanding external events.
It was about inner development.
Exactly. Cultivating that magical personality.
So it speaks to a civilization that was deeply engaged with their inner lives, using these archetypes as tools for self-mastery and spiritual evolution.
Yeah. But then this Venusian system, it made its way to Earth,
Okay, how does that happen?
specifically through Egyptian priests who were attempting to teach the law of one.
Interesting.
But this is where things get a little altered.
Altered how so?
Well, Ra mentions that this earthly version also absorbed influences from Chaldea and Mesopotamia.
I see.
So what arrived here wasn't a pure direct transmission. It was a blend of different cultural understandings, different interpretations.
So the tarot as we know it today, it's not necessarily a perfect replica of that original Venusian system.
It's like a distorted echo,
That's a powerful image.
right? It means the interpretations we have on Earth, they're not these fixed absolute truths. They've been filtered through different human perspectives, which again reinforces that idea of the archetypes as mirrors, not maps.
Absolutely. Because even from their origin to their arrival on Earth, they've been subject to these different viewpoints, different lenses of understanding.
Yeah, so their core essence might remain, but how we perceive them, how we interact with them, that's always going to be fluid.
That makes sense.
Now, going back to this idea of inner training,
Yeah.
Ra says that studying these archetypes, even in their constructed and organized distortion here on Earth, it's still a valuable training system.
Okay.
But the goal is not just to intellectually grasp them. It's to awaken our ability to actually experience them at will.
At will. So like consciously navigating a dreamscape.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really critical distinction that Ra makes. We must first divorce the tarot as a method of divination from this major arcana as representative of 22 archetypes of the archetypical mind.
Okay. So even though tarot cards are often used for fortune telling, that's not their primary purpose in this context.
Not at all. The major arcana, they're not about predicting your future. They're about reflecting your present state of consciousness.
Illuminating your internal landscape.
Exactly. And suggesting potential pathways for growth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's self-reflection, not fortune-telling.
Which again highlights that cosmic mirror idea.
Totally. They're showing you aspects of yourself, your
Yeah.
internal patterns, the dynamics of your mind and spirit.
But they don't dictate what's going to happen.
No. The future is still fluid, shaped by your choices, your free will.
Right. And it's important to remember that these archetypes, they're not these rigid, universal, one-size-fits-all absolutes.
Right. They're flexible.
Ra actually says that each concept complex can be viewed uniquely not only by individuals, but even by those who share racial or planetary influences.
So your personal history, your experiences, even your cultural background, all of that can influence how you perceive and interact with these archetypes.
Yeah, it becomes a very personal, subjective experience.
And this is where I think that metaphor of the prism is so helpful.
Oh, yeah.
You know that pure light of spiritual truth? It's constant.
Sure.
But as it passes through the prism of your individual consciousness, it refracts into a unique spectrum of understanding.
So your encounter with a particular archetype will be different from mine.
Yeah.
And that's completely natural.
Completely natural.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to this idea of archetypes as concept complexes.
Yeah.
Because Ra uses another analogy to really drive this point home.
Mm.
He talks about hydrogen and oxygen,
Right.
And how they don't become water until they're combined in this very specific way.
So again, it's not just the individual components.
It's the relationship.
It's the structure, the interaction.
Exactly. And that creates something entirely new.
Which implies that these archetypes are living dynamic structures. You can't just dissect them, analyze them to death without losing that essence.
Losing that magic.
That waterness.
Yeah, so instead of getting too caught up in the mechanics,
Ra encourages us to feel into them.
feel into them.
Right. To discover the purest gestalt, or vision, or melody, which each archetype signifies to both the intellectual and intuitive mind. So it's about that holistic understanding.
Engaging both our rational and intuitive abilities.
Absolutely.
And it's about asking those deeper questions, right? Not just what does this symbol mean, but what is the overall impression? What feeling does it evoke in me? What deeper truth does it resonate with?
Because when we engage with archetypes in this way, Ross suggests that we can unlock hidden aspects of ourselves.
Like those deep threnodies and joyful ditties of the deep mind.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Isn't it? It's like these archetypes can bring forward those deeper emotions, those understandings that maybe reside in our subconscious.
So it's not about gaining something entirely new.
No.
It's more about remembering who we already are.
It's bringing those forgotten parts of ourselves back into conscious awareness.
Which is why Ra cautions against reducing archetypes to mere functional definitions.
Like just associating them with certain astrological signs or planetary influences.
Right before we've truly understood them as things in themselves, spiritual objects for contemplation.
So the suggestion is to sit with an archetype quietly, without any preconceived ideas. Just try to sense its fundamental nature.
Feel its essence.
Yeah. What is its core essence beyond any intellectual explanation?
Now let's delve into a few specific archetypes and see how this plays out in practice.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's start with Arcana Manai, the magician, which Ra calls the matrix of the mind.
Okay, the matrix of the mind, the magician.
And Ra describes it as that part of us that reaches out into manifestation. That which reaches just as the kinetic phase of intelligent infinity through free will reaches for the logos.
So it's our conscious awareness.
Yes, it's the conscious waiting self of each entity.
That's interesting that it's both conscious and waiting.
Right. It has that potential for action, the free will to engage with the world, but it's also in a state of receptivity.
Open to experience.
Exactly.
And then we have Arcanum II, the High Priestess.
Right.
Which Ra refers to as the potentiator of the mind.
The potential.
And this is described as the unconscious, right? The source of intuition, emotion memory.
It's that fertile ground from which all experience arises.
But it's often veiled in imagery. It doesn't actively enter into manifestation.
Right. It's more like the silent partner.
Yeah, the silent but powerful partner.
The one who makes it all possible.
And Ra emphasizes that there's a veil separating the conscious matrix of the mind from the unconscious potentiator.
Right.
And this veil is integral to the third density experience.
It's what allows for choice.
Exactly, for polarity.
And those dark and light columns that are often depicted with the High Priestess, they're powerful symbols of that polarity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Representing those fundamental contrasting forces that shape our experience in this density.
And what's fascinating is the dynamic tension that exists between the matrix and the potentiator.
They're not just separate static entities.
No, they're in constant dialogue.
Each influencing the other.
Yeah, like a dance between our conscious awareness and the vast depths of our unconscious.
And this relationship is so key for our journey here in this incarnation.
Because Ra explains that the potentiator helps us understand our pre-incarnative choices, our tendencies.
While the magician reaches outward, needing that connection with the potentiator for true understanding.
It's like the magician has the map.
But the potentiator holds the compass.
Exactly. And it's through conscious engagement with our subconscious that real transformation can begin.
Now let's look at Arcanum the Sixth,
Okay.
which is commonly known as the Lovers.
Yeah.
But Ra gives us a different interpretation.
Oh, really? What do they call it?
The transformation of the mind.
That changes things.
It does. It shifts the focus away from romantic love and towards this pivotal moment of inner integration.
Inner integration.
Through a sacred decision. It's the conscious choice between light and dark in mind.
So it's not about external relationships.
No, it's about the inner marriage.
Bringing together those different aspects of ourselves.
Exactly. And this conscious embracing of polarity, this deliberate decision, it becomes the catalyst for evolution.
It's not about resolving the tension between those opposites.
But using that tension to propel us forward.
Right, like a springboard.
And this transition leads directly into Arcanum the Seventh, the Chariot.
The Chariot.
Which Ra calls the Great Way, symbolizing that empowered and directed mind after making that conscious choice.
So it's like the Lovers is that turning point
Yeah.
that sets us on the path.
And then the Chariot is us moving forward with intention.
With purpose.
Yeah, like a charioteer skillfully guiding their team.
I love that.
Now let's turn our attention to Arcanum V, the Hierophant,
Okay, the Hierophant.
which Ra also refers to as the significator of the mind.
The significator of the mind. Interesting.
And this archetype, it reflects that core nature of the mind as both a seeker and a learner.
So it's about our thirst for knowledge, our desire to understand.
Exactly.
Mm.
And what I find so insightful is that it doesn't just focus on what the mind knows,
Right.
but on the very essence of the mind itself, as this dynamic entity that absorbs, seeks, and attempts to learn.
It's about the process of learning
Not just the end result.
and the kind of self that is doing the learning.
Yes, exactly. It's like asking, what are my motivations for seeking knowledge? What do I intend to do with what I learn?
It's about the will to know.
And the reasons behind that will.
It invites us to reflect on how our beliefs have shaped our identity.
Right. Like, what kind of me have I become through the knowledge I've absorbed?
Through the experiences I've had.
And Ra also points out that there's a connection between the significators of the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Oh, interesting.
So while the Hierophant specifically addresses the mind, it suggests this deeper interconnected unity of our identity across all these different aspects of our being.
So it's all intertwined.
Yeah, it's all part of that larger tapestry.
Finally, we come to Arcanum 22,
The choice.
the choice. And Ra emphasizes that this archetype is the keystone of the entire system.
The very essence of third density.
Wow.
And unlike some of the other archetypes which have more flexibility in their interpretation,
Right.
the choice is described as relatively fixed and single.
So it's non-negotiable.
It's fundamental. It's that core polarization between service to self and service to others.
That Ra says is absolutely necessary for what they call harvestability.
From third density.
Yeah.
And it's a choice at its heart between radiating or absorbing love and light.
And Ra's really clear that this isn't about some kind of judgment.
No,
It's not about good versus evil.
it's about recognizing this fundamental choice that we all have to make.
And the impact it has on our spiritual evolution.
Yeah. In fact, Rai even admits that they themselves, during their own third density experience on Venus,
Yeah.
they didn't initially grasp the full significance of this archetype.
Wow.
They didn't give it enough emphasis, which really shows how central it is.
It's like the foundation,
The cornerstone.
the linchpin that holds everything together.
It's like that saying, the statue was forged in fire.
Yeah.
Third
Yeah.
density is that fire. And the choice is that act of consciously shaping the soul within that intense process.
Powerful imagery.
So to bring our deep dive to a close today, it's clear that Rhee's archetypes, they're not these rigid maps or rule books.
They're not about giving us all the answers.
They're cosmic mirrors.
Reflections.
They're complex, multi-layered. They invite us to go inward, to explore, to discover.
But they don't offer easy answers.
But they reflect those profound mysteries of consciousness back to us.
In unique and personal ways.
So as you continue your own journey of learning and self-discovery,
Yes.
we encourage you to sit with those archetypes that resonate most deeply for you.
Explore what those cosmic mirrors are showing you.
What they're reflecting back to you about your inner landscape, your choices, your path.
What do they reveal about the magnificent being that you are?
And on that note, here's a final thought for you to consider. Now that you have a deeper understanding of the central importance of choice within this framework,
Yes.
what is one small intentional choice that you can make today
One small step.
that truly aligns with the radiant core of your being?
May your exploration lead to greater self-awareness and a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things.
Until next time,
Safe travels.
safe travels.